moved to Maple Grove subdivision when I was 23, fresh out of college and eager to start my career as a graphic designer. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Rows of identical two-story houses with manicured lawns, white picket fences, and that wholesome American dream vibe you see in movies. What drew me in wasn't just the affordable rent on the small house I was subletting, but the sense of safety. After living in cramped city apartments where sirens wailed every night, the quiet suburban streets felt like paradise. My daily routine was simple. I worked from home most days, designing logos and websites for small businesses. The isolation didn't bother me much since I was naturally introverted, and I appreciated having my own space to focus. My neighbors seemed friendly enough. Mrs. Lawson next door would wave from her garden, and the Anders across the street had 2 young kids who played in their front yard every afternoon. It was during my 3rd week there that I first noticed the man in the blue sedan. I was taking a coffee break, standing by my kitchen window that faced the street, when I saw him parked about 4 houses down. He was just sitting there, engine running, looking in my direction. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or maybe he was lost and checking his GPS, but the next day, he was there again. Same blue sedan, same spot, same time, around 2 in the afternoon. This time, I paid closer attention. The man appeared to be middle-aged, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He stayed for maybe 15 minutes before driving away slowly, deliberately, like he was studying every house on the block. By the 4th day, I was getting concerned. I started keeping track of his visits, writing down the times in a notebook. It's 2 p.m. every single day, Monday through Friday. Weekends, he didn't show up, which struck me as odd. It felt too systematic to be coincidental. I decided to mention it to Mrs. Lawson while she was tending to her roses. She paused her pruning and looked at me with genuine worry in her eyes. She told me other neighbors had noticed him too, but nobody wanted to make a big deal about it. After all, he wasn't technically doing anything wrong by sitting in a parked car on a public street. That Friday, I was determined to get a better look at him. I positioned myself in my upstairs bedroom window with a pair of binoculars I'd bought for birdwatching, and the blue sedan appeared at exactly 2:03 p.m. I focused the lenses and felt my stomach drop. The man wasn't just randomly observing the neighborhood. He had a notebook in his lap and was writing something down while looking directly at my house. Then he shifted his attention to Mrs. Lawson's house, scribbled some more notes, and moved on to the Anders place. I think that's when the reality hit me that this wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. This person was studying us, documenting our routines, our habits. But for what purpose? The possibilities that ran through my mind weren't pleasant. The following Monday, I called in sick to work, which was easy since I was freelancing. I wanted to see if his pattern would change if my car remained in the driveway all day instead of being gone from my usual grocery runs and errands. Sure enough, at 2 p.m., the blue sedan pulled up to its usual spot. But this time, the man stayed longer, almost 45 minutes. I watched through my curtains as he occasionally raised what looked like a small camera or phone to take pictures. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept checking the locks on my doors and windows, something I'd never felt the need to do in this safe neighborhood. I barely slept, jumping at every small sound the house made as it settled for the night. Tuesday came and went with the same routine. Wednesday, too, but Thursday was different. I was in my home office around noon when I heard footsteps on my front porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Then 3 soft knocks on my door. My heart started racing because I wasn't expecting anyone, and the mailman had already come that morning. I crept to the front window and peered through the blinds. Nobody was there, but on my doorstep was a manila envelope with my name written on it in block letters. No return address, no postmark. Someone had hand-delivered it. I waited a full 10 minutes before opening the door, scanning the street for any sign of the blue sedan or anyone watching. The envelope felt light in my hands, like it only contained a few sheets of paper. Back inside, I tore it open with shaking fingers. What I found inside made my blood turn to ice. There were photographs of me, dozens of them. Pictures of me leaving for the grocery store, checking my mailbox, sitting by my kitchen window with my morning coffee, working in my backyard garden. Some were taken from across the street, others from closer vantage points, including several that must have been shot from my own backyard. But the most disturbing part wasn't just the photos. Each one had a timestamp written in red ink at the bottom, documenting my movements over the past 3 weeks. There were notes, too, scrawled in the margins. Leaves for groceries, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Waters, plants, Thursday evening. Orders pizza, Friday nights. Teas. This person had been watching me far more extensively than just those afternoon visits in the blue sedan. At the bottom of the stack was a single sheet of paper with a message. You have a beautiful routine. I've enjoyed getting to know you. Don't worry, we'll meet properly soon. I remember my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the papers. This had escalated far beyond some creepy neighbor watching the street. This was stalking, surveillance, and what sounded like a direct threat. I immediately called the police, but the officer who took my report seemed less concerned than I hoped. He told me that without any direct threats of violence or attempts to enter my property, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested I document everything and call back if the situation escalated. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every shadow outside my window looked like a person. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Scopped the lights on and stayed downstairs on the couch where I could see both the front and back entrances. Friday morning brought another envelope. This time, the photos were more recent, including several that had clearly been taken the night before, while I sat on my couch with all the lights on. The stalker had been right outside my windows while I was awake and paranoid, and I never even knew it. The note this time was shorter, but more chilling. Tonight, I packed a bag and drove straight to my parents' house, 2 hours away. I couldn't bring myself to spend another night in that house, not knowing when or how this person planned to make contact. I stayed with my parents for a week, calling my landlord to break the lease early and arrange for movers to pack up my belongings. I never found out who the man in the blue sedan was or what he intended to do that Friday night. The police said they increased patrols in the neighborhood for a few weeks, but no one matching his description was ever spotted again. Mrs. Lawson called me a month later to say that a family with 3 kids had moved into my old house and everything seemed normal. But sometimes, late at night in my new apartment across town, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. What was he planning to do when we met properly? The thought keeps me awake more often than I'd like to admit. I started my lawn care business when I was 19 because I needed flexible work that would let me take classes at the community college. The suburbs were perfect for this kind of work. Lots of families who were happy to pay someone else to deal with their yard maintenance while they focused on their busy lives. I could make decent money, set my own schedule, and get some exercise while working outdoors instead of being stuck behind a desk. Willowbrook Heights was one of those upscale neighborhoods where every lawn had to look perfect. The Homeowners Association had strict rules about grass length, weed control, and landscaping standards, which meant steady work for guys like me. I had about 15 regular clients scattered throughout the subdivision, and I'd usually hit 3 or 4 houses per day, depending on the size of their properties. The Carlisle house on Elmwood Drive was one of my bigger accounts. Its large corner lot, mature oak trees, elaborate flower beds, and a backyard that backed up to a small wooded area. Mr. Carlisle was a successful insurance agent who traveled frequently for work, and his wife Martha was a part-time real estate agent. They had twin daughters, maybe 8 or 9 years old, who would sometimes watch me work from their bedroom window on the 2nd floor. I had been maintaining their property for about 6 months when I started noticing odd things. Small things at first, the kind of details you might dismiss if you weren't paying attention. Tools that I was certain I had left in one spot would be moved slightly. Not stolen, just repositioned in ways that didn't make sense. It's my rake, leaning against a different tree than where I had left it. The lawnmower facing the opposite direction from where I had parked it. Initially, I figured maybe Mr. Carlisle was doing some yard work himself between my visits and just moved things around. Or maybe the landscaping crew that handled the flower beds was borrowing my tools. It wasn't a big deal, just mildly annoying to have to hunt for my equipment each time. But then I started finding footprints. Muddy boot prints on the concrete patio that definitely weren't mine. I always wore sneakers, and these prints clearly came from heavy work boots. The prints led from the wooded area behind their house, across the backyard, right up to the sliding glass door that opened into their family room. The first time I saw them, I assumed Mr. Carlisle had been doing some kind of maintenance work, but when I mentioned it to Mrs. Carlisle the following week, she looked confused. She said her husband had been out of town for the past 10 days on a business trip to Denver. The muddy prints were definitely recent. I'd seen them after a rainstorm just 2 days earlier. That's when I started paying more attention to the wooded area behind their house. It wasn't a large woods, maybe half an acre of trees that separated their neighborhood from a shopping center on the other side. During my lunch breaks, I'd sometimes walk back there to eat my sandwich in the shade. The area was crisscrossed with walking trails that local residents used for jogging and dog walking. About 3 weeks after noticing the first footprints, I was mowing the Carlisle's backyard on a Thursday afternoon when I saw movement in the trees. Just a quick flash of someone moving between the trunks, maybe 50 yards back from the tree line. I shut off the mower and listened, but heard nothing except normal suburban sounds. Kids playing in a nearby yard, a dog barking, traffic from the main road. I walked to the edge of the property and peered into the woods. The trees were thick enough that you couldn't see very far, but there were definitely signs that someone had been spending time back there. Small area where the undergrowth had been cleared away, creating a sort of hidden alcove with a clear view of the Carlisle house. Cigarette butts scattered on the ground, along with food wrappers and an empty water bottle. The setup looked deliberate, like someone had created a makeshift observation post. From that position, you could see directly into the Carlisle's family room and kitchen through their large sliding glass doors. At night, with the lights on inside, you'd be able to watch everything happening in those rooms while remaining completely hidden in the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what I'd stumbled onto. Someone was watching this family, studying their routines, their habits. The footprints I'd been finding weren't random. They were evidence of someone approaching the house, probably at night when the family was asleep or distracted. I should have called the police right then, but I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if it was just some teenagers using the woods as a hangout spot and the footprints were unrelated? I didn't want to create a panic over what might be nothing. Instead, I decided to mention it casually to Mrs. Carlisle when I finished mowing. I told her I'd noticed some activity in the woods behind their house and suggested they might want to keep their curtains drawn in the evenings, especially in the family room, but tried to make it sound like general safety advice rather than a specific warning. Her reaction surprised me. Instead of brushing off my concern, she got very quiet and asked me to show her exactly what I found. We walked to the edge of their property together, and when she saw the cleared area with its direct sightline to their house, her face went pale. She told me something that made the situation much more serious. For the past month, she'd been having the strange feeling that someone was watching her family, little things that didn't quite add up. Their motion sensor lights turning on at odd hours when no animals were visible, their dog acting agitated and barking at the backyard for no apparent reason, even finding their garbage cans moved around in ways that didn't match how the garbage collectors typically left them. Most disturbing was what had happened the previous weekend when her husband was out of town. She'd been putting the twins to bed when she glanced out their bedroom window and could have sworn she saw a figure standing at the tree line, just barely visible in the darkness. When she looked again, a few seconds later, there was nothing there. She'd convinced herself it was just shadows and her imagination. We agreed that she should call the police and report what we'd found. I offered to stay while she made the call, partly to provide details about the observation post, and partly because I didn't like the idea of leaving her alone with this knowledge. The officer who responded took this situation seriously, especially when Mrs. Carlyle mentioned her previous concerns about being watched. He examined the cleared area in the woods and confirmed that it appeared to be deliberately constructed for surveillance purposes. The cigarette butts and trash suggested someone had been using it regularly over an extended period. What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. The officer was taking photos of the site when we heard rustling in the woods, maybe 30 yards away. All three of us froze and listened. The sound was definitely someone moving through the underbrush, trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. The officer immediately radioed for backup and told Mrs. Carlyle and me to go back to the house and lock the doors. We could hear him calling out, identifying himself as police and ordering whoever was in the woods to come out and show themselves. From inside the house, we watched through the kitchen window as 2 more patrol cars arrived. The officers spread out and searched the wooded area systematically. About 20 minutes later, they emerged with a man in handcuffs, someone I'd never seen before, maybe in his 40s, wearing dark clothing and carrying a backpack. It turned out he'd been watching the Carlyle family for nearly 2 months. In his backpack, police found detailed notes about their daily routines, work schedules, and habits. He knew when Mr. Carlyle traveled for business, when Mrs. Carlyle showed houses to clients, when the twins had soccer practice. He even knew which nights they typically ordered takeout and what time they usually went to bed. The investigation revealed that he'd been using the woods behind several houses in the neighborhood as observation posts, not just the Carlyle property. He had similar setups for watching at least 4 other families, all of them with young children. They never told us exactly what his intentions were, and honestly, I don't want to know. The fact that he'd been systematically studying multiple families with kids was disturbing enough. Mrs. Carlyle later told me that the detective mentioned finding items in his apartment that suggested he was planning some kind of break-in, though they never gave her specifics. I finished out my contract with the Carlyle family, but I never felt comfortable working in their backyard after that. Every time I walked near the tree line, I found myself scanning the woods for any sign of movement. Even though they caught the guy, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might still be watching. The experience changed how I approach all my jobs now. I pay attention to details that I used to ignore, footprints that don't belong, signs that someone's been in the yard when they shouldn't have been, areas that provide good hiding spots for surveillance. It's made me realize how vulnerable people can be in their own homes, especially in quiet suburban neighborhoods where everyone assumes they're safe. After graduating from college, I took a job as a night security guard for a gated community called Heritage Oaks. The position paid reasonably well for what seemed like easy work, mostly driving around the neighborhood a few times per shift, checking that all the amenities were secure and being available if residents needed assistance with anything. The community was home to about 200 families, mostly retirees and young professionals, who valued the privacy and security that came with living behind gates. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week. The residents were generally friendly, and I rarely had to deal with anything more serious than teenagers trying to sneak into the community pool after hours, or helping someone who'd locked themselves out of their house. Most nights, I'd spend my time reading or watching Netflix in the security office, only venturing out for my scheduled patrols or if someone called with a concern. The community had its share of eccentric residents, which you'd expect in any neighborhood. There was Mrs. Ender, who called at least twice a week, convinced that raccoons were trying to break into her garage. Mr. Phillips liked to take long walks at 2 in the morning and would wave cheerfully. Whenever I passed him, during patrols. The Yamamoto family had 3 cats that had figured out how to trigger the motion sensors on their outdoor lights, creating light shows that sometimes prompted concerned calls from neighbors. But the Blackwood house on Sycamore Lane was different. It was one of the larger homes in the community, a 2-story colonial with a perfectly maintained lawn and elaborate landscaping. From the outside, everything looked normal, even pristine. The problem was what happened inside that house after midnight. I first became aware of the situation during my 3rd week on the job. I was doing my routine 2 a.m. patrol when I noticed lights moving around inside the Blackwood house. Not regular room lights, but the dancing glow of what looked like flashlights or candles. The movement was erratic, like multiple people were walking around in the dark with handheld lights. My initial thought was that they'd lost power and were using flashlights to move around safely. But when I drove past their house again 30 minutes later, the same strange lighting was still visible, and I could see that other houses on their street had normal electrical power. I made a note in my log and decided to keep an eye on the situation during future patrols. Over the next few weeks, I observed the same phenomenon several times, always between midnight and 4 a.m. Always the same dancing lights moving from room to room. Sometimes the activity would last for hours. What made it especially odd was that I never saw the Blackwood family during daytime hours. Their cars were always in the driveway. The lawn was always perfectly maintained. Mail was collected regularly, but I never actually saw any of the residents. Even when I had to patrol during evening hours to cover for a sick colleague, the house appeared dark and unoccupied. I started asking other residents about the Blackwood family during my routine interactions. The responses I got were surprisingly vague. People would say things like, "Oh yes, they're very private," or "nice family, but they keep to themselves." Nobody seemed to know much about them personally, their jobs, their interest, whether they had children. For a tight-knit community where neighbors generally knew each other well, the Blackwoods were mysteriously anonymous. About 6 weeks into my employment, I was approached by Mrs. Chen, who lived 2 houses down from the Blackwoods. She was clearly troubled about something and asked if we could speak privately. She told me she'd been losing sleep because of strange sounds coming from the Blackwood house during the night. According to Mrs. Chen, she regularly heard what sounded like furniture being moved around, sometimes heavy objects being dragged across floors. The sounds would continue for hours, usually starting around midnight and going until nearly dawn. What concerned her most was the rhythm of the sounds. They were too systematic to be normal household activity, almost like someone was following a specific pattern or routine. She'd considered talking to the Blackwoods directly, but the timing was problematic since the activity only happened in the middle of the night. During daytime hours, the house was always silent, and she never saw anyone outside to approach casually. That night, I paid special attention during my patrols. When I drove past the Blackwood house at 1:30 a.m., I could indeed hear sounds from inside, a rhythmic, dragging, or scraping noise that would continue for several minutes, then stop, then start again. The dancing lights were visible in different windows, moving in patterns that seemed deliberate rather than random. I decided to park across the street and observe more carefully. What I saw was deeply unsettling. Through the large front window, I could make out silhouettes of people moving around inside. But their movements were strange and repetitive. They would gather in one area of the room, move together to another area, then return to the original position. This pattern continued for almost an hour while I watched. The next morning, I mentioned the situation to my supervisor, Frank, who'd been managing security for Heritage Oaks for over 10 years. His reaction was not what I expected. Instead of being concerned about potential disturbing the peace violations or noise complaints, he got uncomfortable and told me to mind my own business unless residents were in immediate danger. When I pressed him about it, Frank admitted that the Blackwood house had been a source of complaints for years, but every time security or management tried to address the situation, the complaints would mysteriously disappear. Residents who had reported problems would suddenly claim everything was fine, and ask that no action be taken. This information made me more curious rather than less. I started documenting everything I observed: times, duration of activity, types of sounds, patterns of movement. What emerged was a clear schedule. Strange activity happened every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, always starting between midnight and 1 a.m., always lasting until approximately 4 a.m. During the 7th week of my employment, something happened that changed everything. I was doing my 3 a.m. patrol when I saw someone leaving the Blackwood house through the front door. It was a woman I'd never seen before, probably in her 50s, wearing dark clothing and carrying what looked like a large bag or suitcase. She walked quickly to a car parked in the driveway, not one of the vehicles that were usually there, and drove toward the community exit. I followed at a distance and watched her pass through the gates using what appeared to be a legitimate resident access card. 20 minutes later, during my next pass by the house, I saw her returning. She parked in the same spot, took the bag from her car, and went back inside. The dancing lights resumed immediately. Pattern repeated itself twice more over the next 2 weeks. Always a different person leaving the house, always carrying bags or suitcases, always returning within an hour. The vehicles were different each time, but they all had legitimate gate access. I think that's when I realized this wasn't just eccentric behavior by unusual residents. People were coming and going from that house regularly in the middle of the night, using different cars, but apparently legitimate access cards. The systematic nature of their nighttime activities suggested some kind of organized operation. My breaking point came during my 10th week on the job. I was doing a routine patrol around 2:30 a.m. when I heard screaming from the direction of Sycamore Lane. Not the kind of scream you'd associate with someone being startled or having an argument. This was someone in genuine distress, crying for help. I immediately drove toward the sound and realized it was coming from the Blackwood house. Through the windows, instead of the usual dancing lights, I could see what looked like a struggle taking place. Multiple figures moving erratically, furniture being overturned, definitely signs of some kind of physical altercation. I called 911 immediately and then radioed for my supervisor. Screaming continued for several more minutes before suddenly stopping completely. By the time police arrived, the house was dark and silent. When officers knocked on the front door, there was no response. The police were eventually able to contact the official residents of the house, an elderly couple named Robert and Margaret Blackwood, who, it turned out, had been staying with their daughter in Florida for the past 3 months due to health issues. They had no knowledge of anyone using their house during their absence and were shocked to learn about the nighttime activities that had been occurring. The investigation that followed revealed that someone had been using the Blackwood house as a base for some kind of illegal operation. The systematic nighttime activities, the rotating cast of people with legitimate gate access, the careful schedules, it was all part of an elaborate scheme that had been operating for months without detection. I never learned the full details of what they discovered inside the house, but the police presence continued for several days and multiple people were eventually arrested. The Blackwood family returned immediately and had extensive security improvements made to their property. What bothered me most about the whole situation was how long it had been going on without anyone taking action. The residents who complained had their concerns dismissed or forgotten. Security personnel were discouraged from investigating, and the community management seemed more interested in avoiding problems than addressing them. I finished out my employment contract, but I never felt the same level of confidence in the security of the community. Something that elaborate could operate undetected for months in a gated neighborhood with professional security. What else might be happening behind those perfect suburban facades that we're all trained to ignore?